Welcome and thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe to the channel so that you get a notification every time I upload a video. Please give the video a thumbs up and please share the video. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the random number generator in C++. C++ gives us the power to generate random numbers through the function rand. This function is defined under the standard template library, which is abbreviated as STL. Right? It is defined by the header file cstdlib. Right? The function itself takes no parameters and then it returns an integer. What does this function do? Right? It can be used to generate a series of random numbers. Right? It can generate a series of random numbers in the range 0 to the rand max number, which stands for random max number. Right? The random max number differs with different implementation. However, it is guaranteed to be at least 32,767. The good thing about the minimum and maximum number of these series that is generated, right? You have the power to change it, right? That's why it doesn't matter if it has the max or not. But that is useful to know that it is the default whenever you don't define it, right? The minimum number and maximum number of the series generated, it can be modified, right? I'll show you how to modify it, right? This is the syntax of how to generate these random numbers, right? We use the function rand. You can only get one int at a time. Every time you call the rand function, it will give you back an integer from that sequence, right? It is obviously between 0 and 1, between 0 and max, I mean, by default. And then this is how you would then change those minimum and maximum bounds that are defined by default. So the first line here, it shows you how to modify the max, which we call the upper bound, right? This is what UB stands for. It is abbreviation for upper bound, right? So how do you do that? You write rand, the function, you use the mod operator, and then write the number that you want your series to not go beyond, right? If we choose that we want a series of numbers between 0 and 100 or 99, right? Let me just say 99. You would then write mod 100, because what then the upper bound is, right, is n, which is the number that you will write, minus 1. It will then generate numbers between 0 and 99. Then how do you change the minimum as well? Because this here will only let you control the maximum number. So this is the formula now for controlling both the upper bound and lower bound. So there is the upper bound, there is the lower bound. You define those two numbers, then you go to this formula, open bracket, the rand function, mod, open bracket, it's your upper bound, subtract your lower bound, then you add 1. Close the bracket and then close the bigger bracket. That's the first part. And then add your lower bound, right? That is the entire formula there. This will then give you a number. Every time you call it, it will give you a number between the lower bound and the upper bound that you have defined. Let us head over to VS Code. Let me show you how this works in code. So I have already prepared a file to write the code. It is called random numbers, C++.cpp, I mean, right? So I will say cout rand and line. Wrong spelling there. Rand, and then this rand is defined in this header file, include cstdlib, right? So when I run now, I should get a random number there, or a random integer. There you go, 41. If I run it again, it gives me 41. If I run it again, it gives me 41, right? So you can notice that it is giving us the same number as we are running, right? Why is it called a random number? But I'll explain that. As I've said, that this here will only return a single digit from the sequence it has generated. So every time the program runs, as you can see, I'm rerunning the program every time. When you run a program, it generates a random number series. And then when you call the function itself, it gives you back the first number, which is 41 by the looks of it, right? So every time you are running this, it generates the sequence, and then when you call, it gives you the first number. So now if you want to see the other numbers in that series, you can't rerun the program every time. You must run the program once so that it generates the series, then call the rand function many times so that it iterates through that series. So how do you do that? Use a for loop or a loop, whichever loop that you decide to use. Int I starts from 1, and then it will stop at 5, and then I will increment this by 1. And then if you are watching and you do not understand loops, that is fine. I will post a link in the description below to a video that will introduce you to C++ loops. It will show you the for loop, the while loop, the do while loop. Click on the link in the description below and go watch that video. You will understand our loops. So now I'm going to put this in the loop, save the code, and then run it. So as you can see now, the first number in that series is 41, and then these are the other numbers, 18,020, right? So as you can see, that is the series that is generated. So we are only displaying only 5, right? We can go up to 10 or however random numbers you need, right? We'll just display there 10, right? But let us just display 5. So I want you to notice something here, right? Every time I run this, I get the same sequence: 18,000, 6,000, 26,000, 19,000, right? Run that. You can see 41, 41, 18,467, same, 6,334, same, 26,500, same, 19,169, same. Why am I getting the same random now? Right, I will explain that. Now, we are going to then move on to check the upper bound, right? So as you can see, we are generating random numbers even though we are getting the same sequence every time, right? So now, as you can see, this is just all the numbers coming randomly from 41, 26,000, right? So now to then bound or restrict the maximum number, you then go mod and then put the upper bound, which now I'll just put 10, right? So these random numbers should not go above 10 now. As you can see, 17409. So I've bounded now the maximum number to 9, because remember the upper bound is the number that you've written, which is 10 minus 1, right? You'll never see 10. If I run this again, same sequence, right? As I've said, I will explain that. But if you change that now, you should see now that your random numbers will not go above 100. Different random numbers now: 0, 41, 67, 34, 69, right? It never goes above 100. Even if you can, maybe let's say it's 10 now here, right? Save that, run it. You will see the other numbers that will appear. They cannot go above 100. There, the maximum number there that we see is 78. See, it's between 0 and 100, right? Let us then go back to our 5. And then how do I then change the minimum number and the maximum number? How do I then control? Because as you can see that in our random numbers, we do have 0. Let us say now my random numbers, I wanted them to start from between 15 and 100. How do I then do that? It is this formula here, right? Let me write that. Right, I've decided that my upper bound will be 100, my lower bound will be 15. So you need that first parenthesis there, open bracket, rand. You then have mod, and then after mod you have this bracket as well, bracket, and then it's upper bound minus lower bound. I've said this will be 100, this will be 15. So that is 100 minus 15, and then plus 1. So I'm done with this part here. I then now add the lower bound. So outside the big bracket, so I need to first close that. That is the big bracket, the blue bracket, right? And then you need to add the lower bound, which is 15. As we should expect now that the random numbers must be between 15 and 100. I should not see that 0 anymore, or any number less than 15 and numbers above 100. As you can see there, 56, 78, 71, 27, 92. Numbers between 15 and 100. If you run that, of course, you'll get the same sequence. But if I change, let's say now I change that to 95. Let us see. Right, that's the lower bound, so it must be changed even here. 95. So I should get all the numbers between 95 and 100, including those, because unlike the one where you are controlling the upper bound only, this one is including the lower bound and upper bound. So we might see 95 and 100 there. There is your 100. It generated 100 3 times, which is bad. Let me change that to 94. But these are random numbers. These are valid random numbers. Eh? It's just generating the same numbers multiple times. As you can see, we have 101, which is greater than 100. What is wrong there? I see that my lower bounds are not the same. So these here have to be the same number, because I mean, what is that now? Because this is lower bound, this is lower bound. So this one must be 94 as well. So if you mess up there, as you can see, you'll get wrong numbers, right? Because this must be between 94 and 100, not 101. Let me then generate that. Should give us the correct bounds now. There you go, 95, 99, 97, 100. So that is how you control your upper bound and lower bound. Now let us move on to the question that I've been asking, and then probably you've been wondering, why are we getting the same sequence of random numbers all the time, right? So this is where now we need to understand this thing called seeding, right? This is where the srand function comes in. We've got a second function now that works in conjunction with the rand function, right? The srand function, similarly to the rand function, it comes from the CSTD lib, right? It is also provided under the STL library, right? As I've said, it is from the same header file, right? What does this function now do, right? It is used to initialize the random number generators. It gives a starting point for producing the pseudo random number integer series. Right? It changes the starting point so that the series changes as well. The argument which is used in that srand function, right? The argument which is passed as a seed, so it is called a seed, for generating a random number series or a pseudo random number. When a different seed, this is the part now that is important, right? When a different seed is passed in a srand function, the pseudo number generator will generate a different series of integers. This is what we're looking for. So our answer is the seed, right? We need to use the seed in order to change the random numbers. What is a seed? A seed is a number used to generate a new or different pseudo number series. Now, coming to the syntax now of how do we then use this seed and srand to get a different sequence of numbers. So before we get into the syntax, it is then important to just point out that the rand function generates a pseudo-random number series based on the seed. By default, the seed is given by the result of srand 1, right? So let me show you why we've been getting that 45 or that same sequence every time. Now, if you look at the code that I already had here, right, the first time before I ran this, right, let me remove that and then write out, see out rand and line, save, and then run. So as you can see, and if you remember, we're getting 41, right? So every time you run this, we are getting 41. And then if you print out the sequence, it will be the same sequence, right? So what's happening in the background is that your seed in srand is 1. So it's like this by default, 1. Right? So if I run the code, still you will get 45 every time. So now let us say I change that to 2. Let's see if you then get a different number. There, a different number, 45. Because now we have changed the seed has changed the starting point. Now a different sequence of random numbers has been generated, right? Let us put in maybe 5 there, save and run. You can see 54, right? Let me then bring back the loop so that we can see out all the numbers now, right? I can then remove this as well so that we start with the rand only. So you can see that now I've got these numbers, right? When I change, if I run again, I'll get the same sequence, right? Because remember, the seed has not changed, so it will generate the same sequence of numbers. Let us change that to 2, and then you will see that it will then start from 45 and also have a different set of numbers compared to these ones, right? That's because the seed changes the starting point, and then the numbers that are generated change as well. Now, if you notice here is that each number or seed will generate the same sequence of numbers regardless of when or how you run the code. If the seed is 1, the random numbers will start from 41. It will generate the same numbers, exactly the same numbers, right? So that is how you change. Number 1, that is how you get a different sequence of numbers. But then how is it then a random number if we know based on what seed will what sequence come up? Because if I put 1, it will give me the exact same sequence. You can write down the sequence, you will get the exact same sequence. How is this then a random number generator? You know, that is why it is called a pseudo random number generator, right? How do we then make that random number realistic, right? Is that we must make sure, or we must find a way of not knowing what is the seed, right? If you don't know the seed, you will not know the random number that it is generated. So that is how it becomes a realistic random number. Now the standard practice, right, it is to use the time function. The time function will give you a number depending on the time, of course, but the good thing is that you don't know the number it will return. It is just based on time, right? So since you don't know the seed it is returning, you don't know the sequence it will generate. And that time is changing all the time. Every time you call rand, the time value has changed. So you will always get a number from a different sequence that was generated. Now it is a real random number. Now let me show you. This is the syntax, right? It will be srand and then time with 0, as I've said. That's the standard practice. And then the time function is defined in the time h header file. Let us then show you that in code. You will see now that every time we call our function, it should give us a unique number or a unique sequence. Remove that one there, but before we include our time, we need to include our header file, #include time.h. So you will notice that every time I run with the same seed, right, it is giving me the same sequence. Now if I have that time, now time 0, and of course it is imported, right, #include time h, right. So when you run now, you should see that you will get a different sequence every single time you call your rand, and you never know what it is. See, changing, it is changing. You see that is 26,452. This is 26,462, right? 5 2 62 52, and then you have 10,735, 10,212. You have 11,000, you have 32,000, you have 3,000, you have 29,000, you have 20,809, you have 18,000. So now you will always get a fully randomized series every time you run your code. That's because from that time function, you are getting a different seed every single time you run that rand. So now this is a realistic random number generator. And then you can use and modify your lower bound and upper bound as I've showed you. So now I'm just going to modify both. Remember, it's mod, then open close bracket, your upper bound, which I'm going to choose 100 for now, and then subtract your lower bound, which I'm going to say is 15, plus 1, and then close the bigger bracket as well, and then outside you then add your lower bound. So if I add my lower bound, it should then give me random numbers between 15 and 100, right? As you can see there, 98, 61, 75. If I run that, a different sequence of numbers in the bound. Again, you can see now it is a very good random number generator. That 19, C88, 51, 31. You see, you can then change your bound however you please. It will give you random numbers every time you run the function, but you need to use the srand and the time function, and you don't have to put the srand function inside of the loop. It must be ran one time, which is like 9 in my case, and then call your rand function as many times as you want. That is how it becomes a realistic random number. I hope you understood how to generate random numbers in C++. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll catch you on the next one.